Hello, everyone. A very warm welcome to today's live virtual session on Onboarding Reloaded, transforming new hires into top performers. I'm Usmani from People Matters, and I will be your host for today. As the world of work transforms in new and unprecedented ways, the way we onboard our employees is also rapidly changing. From interactive training modules to virtual simulations, the role of technology is on the rise. It is not surprising given that this is a critical touchpoint in the larger employee lifecycle that will define new hires' performance and success. The faster they learn about the organization and their role, the more they will be able to accomplish in the long run. Continuing with our endeavor to provide actionable thoughts to our community, People Matters, in partnership with Imarticus Learning, is excited to present this exclusive session, which will dive into what it takes to implement an impactful onboarding strategy for the new age workforce. Before I introduce our speakers, a few words about our partner, Imarticus Learning. Imarticus Learning provides path breaking enterprise solutions to various tech oriented learning needs through induction training, e learning, gamification, game based onboarding, and much more. Imarticus specializes in finance, technology, and leadership training and has delivered impactful learning modules for top companies in India and abroad. And with that, I welcome our experts who have joined us today. We first have with us Ashish Kapoor, Director and HR Business Partner, Ernst& Young. Ashish started his journey in HR over 17 years ago with Hughes and joined EY in 2006. In his ongoing stint with EY as an HR business partner for four high-growth business verticals, Ashish leads HR teams across locations, focusing on leadership, culture, and talent strategies. He has led impactful talent transformations throughout his career and continues to create, stimulate, and disrupt thinking and practices on leadership development and talent strategies. Thank you so much for joining us today, Ashish. Welcome to the session.
Thanks, Asmani. Thanks for having us.
We also have with us Abhishek Mehrotra, Chief Human Resource Officer, UB. Abhishek is responsible for leading UB's people and culture function, developing and executing the organization's HR strategy to take UB on its next phase of strategic growth with its people first culture. With over 20 years of experience in HR, he has enabled employee success in high-end R&D, complex managed services, and social media domains across Western and Eastern work cultures with organizations such as IBM, Nokia, Huawei, and ByteDance. Thank you for joining us today, Abhishek.
Thank you, Asmani, for the introduction. Good evening, everyone.
Thank you. We also have with us Vinay Agarwal, a global head business HR Tech Mahindra. Vinay is also the head of Tech Mahindra's largest location based in Hyderabad, employing more than 24,000 associates. Having worked in IT for more than 2 decades, he has performed different leadership roles in various organizations. Before Tech M, he was head of operational excellence for IT captive of the Bank of America, and prior to that, he drove IT process transformation programs for many enterprises across Europe and APAC. Thank you for joining us today, Vinay. It's great to have you here.
Thank you very much for having me.
And we also have with us Sandeep Rambhatla, Senior Vice President, Head Enterprise Learning at Imarticus Learning, an entrepreneur, product, and process design professional with over 18 years of work experience. Sandeep is an avid researcher in the area of applied learning games and has publications in leading academic journals. He designs and develops complex simulation games that mimic the real world setup and allows participants to experiment in a risk free environment. The games he has designed are used by leading corporations and academic institutions across the world. Thank you so much for joining today, Sandeep. It's great to have you here.
Thanks, Asmani. Thanks for having me as well.
So, before we begin, a very quick note for our attendees today. If you have any questions during the session, please feel free to use the chat window. We will bring them up during the session and towards the end, which is reserved exclusively for Q&A. So keep posting those questions in the chat window. And now I would like to begin the session with the opening question that I have for all our panelists. Just need one or two lines from you on this, just quick takes. So the first thing that I wanted to understand was, what is that number one critical challenge that companies face when design an effective onboarding program for the new hires? We can start with you, Ashish, and then
Sure, sure.
get to
Thanks, Asmani. I hope I'm audible and good evening, everyone. Thanks for having us here again. People Matters and Maticus. I think a great topic. The ongoing campus season, a lot of other things happening onboarding, of course, is one of the most important things. So I think on the specific question, Asmani, my thoughts are that usually, one of the primary challenges that company face when designing an effective onboarding program is striking the right balance between providing comprehensive information and overwhelming the employees. The
Uh,
process usually aims at
I can't hear.
helping. Okay. Um, I think Vinay mentioned he's not able to hear. Is everybody else able to hear? Okay, I'll keep going then. So I think I was just saying that the onboarding process typically aims at helping all the new hires assimilate fairly well into the company culture, understand what roles, responsibilities do they have, and acquire necessary knowledge and skills that is usually required to be successful. However, and if the onboarding program is too overloaded in information, it can be very overwhelming, and the ability to absorb is hindered usually, and therefore also impacts the retention of the important information. So I would say that prioritizing the key information and then breaking it down into digestible chunks is the top two things that I would say is are the biggest challenges that companies face.
Thank you for sharing that. That was a very
Sure.
important point. Not overload the candidate with too much information. So, Abhishek, can we have you next?
Yeah, I think just kind of carrying on to what Ashish shared. I think, of course, overload of information and what really to consume in the first few days versus what can wait. I think that hard prioritization is kind of very important. I think the second part when I look at anybody onboarding is irrespective of whether you're coming from campus or you're a lateral hire or you are an experienced exec. I think how quickly somebody can get the feel of the place, the vibe, the culture, and how you can quickly assimilate. So, what
Yeah.
most of the times a lot of us end up doing is give that booster shot on culture download. Okay, this is the culture, this is the values
Smani,
of an
I'm not
organization.
able to hear anything.
Okay, I think could
Uh,
be an issue at Vinay's end. We'll
Ah,
probably
okay.
write on the chat. I'll do that on the chat. Abhishek,
Yeah, thank
please
you so
carry
much.
on.
So I think what we end up doing is okay, do a culture module, do a session on values. But I think one of the things that I've always felt is that doing that presentation or that slide is not enough. You can't explain a culture or a value on a slide or in a 1 hour, 2 hour session. I think long back we used to have like 3 days of culture immersion workshops happening in some hotels when say about 10, 15 years back, but then it has condensed but is still not there. So I think that's the other key challenge, and I think one of the ways that we have kind of trying to solve that at UB and even otherwise is make people feel the culture of the organization even before they step in, and then kind of carry it forward. It has to be experienced to believe in it and to understand it rather than on a presentation. So I think, like Ashish said, how much information you can overload on day one, day two, day three, day 10, and second, how can people start feeling the vibe, the culture, the feel of the place. I think those two will always be the challenge for anybody coming new to the organization.
Great, great. Sandeep, would you like to go next?
Sure, absolutely. Good evening, everybody. And I completely agree with Ashish and Abhishek's point in terms of the challenge between comprehensiveness and how do you really move away from PowerPoint presentations to experiencing the overall value and culture. But from my view of me having discussed with a couple of HR professionals, the most important point that came in all my discussion is how do I get the new employees have a sense of belongingness to the organization, right? So the biggest challenge that we see in terms of an ongoing research is that the psychological contract between an employer and an employee is dwindling. That being the case, in an era where space is expanded and time is shrunk, it is the need of the hour to get somebody productive as early as possible, get them to integrate themselves to the organization as early as possible. But at the same time, like what Ashish said, how much comprehensive should that particular onboarding be, because the need is for you to get integrated, isn't it? But at the same time, striking the balance of creating a sense of belongingness, and more importantly, if you take a step back, any new hire onboarding is a new candidate trying to embark on a new journey, within an organization. That typically starts with a sense of anxiety that they have, no matter how much experience that they have, right? It's a new life in the entire chapter of that particular employee. So how do you reduce that anxiety, and how do you really cut the chase and get them to understand and navigate the system as early as possible, becomes one of the biggest challenge that most organizations in my mind have.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think I loved how you spoke about the candidate experience, and also, joining a new job is similar to, get starting a new life. So thank you for sharing that, Sandeep. So Abhishek, I'll ask you the next question. So you spoke about culture when we were talking about the challenge, right? So maybe we can dive a little more into that. And could you tell me, what role do cultures, value, and purpose play in onboarding, and how we can be more effective, in communicating these to our new hires?
Yeah, so I think culture is and values and the purpose of the organization are all three very important uh, for anyone to perform in the organization. Also see this as a place where they want to build their career. And of course, the tenure of careers in a particular organization are shortening, and we can't expect people to stick around for always. But I think it's more about the experience that people get when they're working in a place, and culture reflects that. Um, so I think when we talk about values, how does that value translate into that individual's day-to-day working? Culture is what do I feel every day at work? How do I experience that culture? Right? I think no culture is a bad culture. Every culture is a great culture, but it's in a particular context. A manufacturing setup will have a very different culture as compared to a tech versus a startup versus a mature setup. Every culture is great and it's right in a particular context. So I think what we all have to continuously do is how do we make sure that somebody who's coming in the organization, they experience that culture and they see those values being lived every day. And 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 I think in my mind, the culture, the first touch point is when the first time you've contacted the person to join your organization, is the first call that the recruiter has done to the person. From that point, the culture starts. They start experiencing it. The way they see your career side, the experience has been when they apply for a job role and they come through your recruitment system, or the so that first touch point till the last day that the person is in the organization is everything is culture and the values that they experience. And I think so what we have to what we kind of try and do that is also look through this entire journey from day one when somebody contacted them till the last day, and then see whether the experience, and that's where the employee experience comes in, is that consistent, is that improving over a period of time or not. So I think all this plays a very vital role, and now we have enough technology and tools and platforms available to kind of also put a number, or what do you say, a quantifying metric to say whether you are on the right track or not.
I also agree, Abhishek, and I think Asmani, if I can just put in a point, just continuing to where Abhishek left, we're focusing. I mean, specifically because you said new hires, and a lot of the new generation or whatever it is called now. I mean, there's so many X, Y, and Z's, but uh, what we realized till some time back, we were also focusing very heavily on culture, but the difference we realized was, in addition, that the youngsters are looking for purpose. And an organization which is a purpose driven organization, where the culture largely is built over it being a purpose driven organization, really helps. And obviously a lot of things have changed. I mean, from probably our parents to our generation to the next generation, a lot of the initial necessities or the basic necessities are already met. So that's really not the need. And therefore there needs to be something to drive constantly, and that's where we feel purpose plays a large role, I mean, at least at EY. And I would just to add to what Abhishek said, I think a organization which is more purpose driven, purpose could be anything of the organization, but where it's clearly highlighted him and shared with the people and the employees, that I think also goes a long way in helping employees understand and imbibe themselves to the culture. Just that, yeah.
Yeah, no, no. Thank you for adding on to that, Ashish, and thank you, Abhishek, for talking about culture and the role it can play in the organization. So, Vinay, I would like to come to you and ask you. We've spoken about culture, and two of the things, the outcomes that we want from onboarding is employee engagement and retention, right? So, how can onboarding specifically, contribute to those goals? From your experience, what have you seen?
Yeah, yeah. I think somewhere I read that research has proven that if the employee has good experience in first 23 days, his chances of sticks are very high. So the belongingness, opinion formation that really happens initial days, that goes a long way. So if the experience is good in the initial few weeks, then basically I think the retention and engagement tends to be very high. If that's not good, it takes much, it's so much harder to change the perception. So from engagement perspective, that's the reason I think we figured out. And especially in the hybrid days, the people keep exploring opportunities even after joining. So there are cases where people after joining also say that, no, I've got another offer, and a day or 2 days later they abandon the work, etc. So retention, or even I would say the having the person on board in true sense, it is extremely important that initial experience is good, and having basically a good simple process where all the information collection, document collection, etc. is smooth, and if people get an opportunity to understand the organization, absorb the information in the initial days, uh, that really basically increases the probability of people staying in the organization.
Thank you.
So,
Thank you for sharing. Yes, yes, son. Please add.
yeah, I think I would like to just add a point. Like what Vinay said, engagement seems to be the mantra. But the biggest challenge that I've also faced when I've discussed with a lot of HR professionals is, what does that engagement mean, right? Because it actually means different things for different organizations. It means different things even for different individuals as well, right? Because today, if you look at the way in which we are consuming content, that content consumption is, if we take, the immense, usage of the OTT platforms, you are actually, consuming content, in a binge fashion. You're continuously, going and then consuming content, and that is engrossing yourself, and you're lost in time. So the important factor with engagement, I'm sure the panelists would agree with me, is the sense of flow. How can really the candidate be taken into that sense of flow, in such a manner that they do understand the values, the culture, and they're engrossed with the overall setup. So engagement, though important, what needs to be figured out is, what does that really mean to the specific target audience that we are currently dealing with as well. That becomes a very tricky challenge in my view.
No, thank you for sharing that, Vinay, and thank you for adding on to that, Sandeep. You spoke about engagement, and my next question is actually to you regarding engagement, and I want to talk particularly about the pre-onboarding stage. And could you share how organizations can make that pre-onboarding stage, more engaging, and like even Ashish and Abhishek spoke about, make it informative and not overload the new hire.
Sure, sure. So, I mean, choosing the candidate, the right candidate for the right, role is half the battle won, right? But the important challenge is, today when the notice period happens to be 30, 60, 90 days for different organization, the pre-boarding churn, where people accept offers and don't even turn up, becomes a problem. And when large organizations are there, it becomes practically impossible for anybody within the organization, from a human intervention, to keep constantly checking with the candidates as to where they are they comfortable, would they be joining? Because again, let's face the truth, where employees are also, or candidates are also, offer shopping, isn't it? So in such a scenario where it's the dynamics between the supplier market and the demand market, which constantly keeps altering, pre-boarding becomes quite important. So there are three things that we are trying to achieve. How does a lot of effort has gone in identifying the right candidate, but how do we ensure that particular candidate is going to be onboarded? Secondly, from a candidate standpoint, when I have, let's assume, 2 or 3 offers, which is that particular offer that I'm going to take, when, let's assume, citrus paribus, everything else is constant, right? If the pay package is constant and everything else is constant, how do I choose, my organization, right? So that becomes a, critical point. And the third thing is, for organization, if, to ensure that the candidate whom they have selected, also understands the value and the culture even before they've come in. That's what I think Abhishek also had mentioned, that, they start engaging as early as possible, because then, the employee, even before they join in, has understood, more about the organization, right? So interesting ways of doing it is, again, now it's the age of metaverse. The other important aspect is to go ahead and then start, giving them game based learning experiences. So one of, our research in the way in which that we have done today is to create virtual environments, where we onboard, new hires, into the system as early as, when the offer letter is rolled out, right? And what the system does is it starts constantly looking in for engagement parameters and creates a pre-boarding churn index, which is a probability that if a particular candidate who's accepted the offer would join the organization or not, right? So the way in which the system does is to look at multiple engagement factors. Have they logged in? Have they completed? Have they engaged? With the entire system. Basis the entire experience, you go ahead and then create that box. And more importantly, what happens is, like what I said, everybody loves, an interesting story. So you create a story around the overall value system and ethos of the organization. Give employees multiple learning paths. So if I'm joining a particular department, can I actually have a sneak peek of what really happens there within that particular department, right? So can I virtually meet my, employees? Can I meet my managers? Can I virtually meet my colleagues? To have those conversations, so that I am better informed even before I've joined the organization. So game-based learning allows us to create those virtual environments, create those virtual conversations, and then start engaging with your employees as early as possible. And the power, that these systems have is you would be in a position to, create multiple, assessments and learning paths, create experience zones, of your products. So if you're a product company, you could create an experience zone where I could now understand more about your products even before I've taken the system. So the key is, how do I make it more memorable? How do I make it more experiential? How do I, give them a sense of purpose, for them to take that particular decision, for them to join the organization? So, these interesting tools, today could, help us, have a very impactful and immersive onboarding experience.
Great, great. Thank you for sharing that, Sandeep. And I really liked how you gave us like examples and really dove deep into how gamification can also play a role in this. So thank you for sharing that. And Ashish, I would now like to come to you. So now I want to talk more from an onboarding lens. Like we've spoken about pre-onboarding. So now I want to understand how organizations can make onboarding a more collaborative process where there are multiple stakeholders involved. It's not just limited to the HR function, but there are managers, there are other team members. How can they contribute to this?
Sure, Usmani. Thanks for putting it the question. I think there's also questions coming in from the audience parallelly. Maybe we can look at it if anything relates. But I think on this specific topic, which is, how could it be a collaborative process? And I totally agree. It was a very interesting reference that Vinay, I think, provided that. I think he mentioned 23 days initial are the very crucial days. And I think how collaborative everybody is in those initial few weeks is fairly important. I would say a few things that I would recommend. One is the a very clear communication and coordination. So making sure that there is open lines of communication between managers, HR professionals, other team members who are involved in the entire onboarding process. Also, everybody has very clearly defined roles, responsibilities, and also expectations from each stakeholder is very clear. That sort of avoids confusion because sometimes there's a lot of overlap, and it also helps in ensuring a much more coordinated effort. The other is probably also preparing stakeholders, before this is happening. So educating and preparing managers, HR professionals, team members on their roles in the entire onboarding process. Also making sure that we are able to provide them not just with necessary training, but also resources. Sometimes, people might say the number of people that we are onboarding at this stage, and the resources that we have don't really align well. So making sure not just the responsibility and the training, but also the resources are apt. The other, of course, is a much more collaborative planning, goes without saying, between all the stakeholders. And I think manager involvement is equally important. We should encourage managers to actively participate in the entire onboarding process, because they play a very crucial role in guiding, supporting the new hires, which largely is helping them integrate with the organization, with the team, understanding their own roles. I think that's where managers need to make sure that they have regulated or allocated times for these check-ins, as we call them, or provide feedback as often as it can on the spot. um, the team involvement, of course, is important. Lastly, I would say also the cross functional integration. I think that's equally important, because it's not just that respective team or the individual. Facilitating cross functional integration by making sure there is opportunities for new hires to interact with employees from different teams, different areas of the organization. This also helps employees in understanding the broader company. You were talking about the culture of the organization, so understanding that, understanding the structure, understanding what are these necessary connections to build in the initial few weeks, and therefore foster a much more collaborative mindset. When you start meeting with people, initially itself from different teams, it does help you foster that sort of a mindset. And I think lastly, just feedback loops, making sure that there's enough feedback mechanism to gather input from stakeholders who are involved in the onboarding process, making sure the effectiveness of the onboarding program is regularly reviewed. I think this iterative feedback loop makes sure that the ongoing collaboration works. The enhancement of the onboarding experience also is continuous, and I think that really, I would say, is what some of the organizations should do to make sure it's a collaborative process.
Thank you for sharing that, Ashish. So
Sure.
we have like a couple of audience questions that are talking about the role of managers and the team involvement. So would any of our other panelists like to step in and share their perspective on this?
I think the question two and question three is talking of something around that. Probably I can share what I think. So more about the question three. Usually onboarding is considered an HR responsibility. I think we all have seen this problem. Okay, make sure that the guy walks in through the door. I think one of the things that we have strongly pushed in UB, and we've seen quite amount of success, is that entire mindset that HR is going to drive and make sure that the person onboards, right? So now the markets have changed. The industry is come to a little bit of more sanity in the last 3 to 6 months, but before that, there were crazy amount of offer dropouts. And I think beyond just the compensation, I think what we realize, if like what Sandeep said, if the comp was same, everything was same, why should somebody succeed with you? That's a
Yeah.
question that all of us need to answer, and that is largely what we have seen, and what has worked for us is when the hiring manager or the team in which the person is joining are taking the ownership. So the ownership in our organization is not HR, is the manager, right? To make sure that the person walks through the door. Now, unless unique situations, which can be, so one, you should select the right person, and if you have selected the right person, made the job and the expectation of the role very clear, then I think that should not be the ambiguous area. Then engagement is what we need. So what we put in place is like what Ashish was saying, check-ins, while and we've also enabled it through technology now. But eventually, the onus lies on the manager to engage with the person, keep the person abreast, and there is a practical reason for it. Also, it's not because the manager has to do it. The fact is, beyond a point, an HR person, a recruitment person will probably just do a check-in and say, okay, is your resignation done? Have you got your relieving? Are your papers done? Those are the process. But a manager who's on the job will start talking about, okay, what is the problem you're working on? What are you going to experience when you come in? Okay, what are some of the things that are happening in the org? Now that is genuine conversation. So when we say check in with the candidate, it is those genuine conversations where you're letting the person know about the organization and what a person can come and expect and how it is. So that bonding, what we said across team, and what we do is we kind of create at least 4 to 5 checkpoints at a bare minimum for every person, which is the HR business partner and who's where the person is going to join, the hiring manager, somebody from the team, across team stakeholder. Okay, so somebody is joining in engineering, somebody from the product is going to call up and also check on. So the idea is to get that person, have enough touch points, give him enough information, opportunity for the person to engage. So, but it has to be led by the manager, facilitated through the HR process systems. That's the approach that always works much better.
Thank you for sharing that. I really liked how you spoke in depth about the manager involvement, and that definitely answers our audience questions. So, Vinay, is there anything that you would like to add, basis your experience?
So it is basically the journey which starts from the candidate stage to we track it till 3 months, and we call it the whole associate assimilation program. So we have implemented a applicant tracking system. So right from basically resume shortlisting to the video interview, things, there's a complete tracking, and there's a applicant experience team which focuses on really engaging with the candidate until the person joins. So from joining onwards, the day one is very important. From measurement perspective, we take a feedback at the end of the first day, first week, first month, and a follow up of second month and third month end. And in between, there are a lot of stakeholders involved. So basically, on the first, of course, is very critical. So getting all the information, documents, etc., in a simplified manner, which doesn't create too much of hassle. That's the focus area. Uh, the first week, the focus is to make sure that we expose the new joiners to different stakeholders, different. So, example, learning team, leadership development team, even finance session. If anybody has any clarification on the policies and tax, etc. Uh, and in the first week, basically, we also do unit induction, right? So after understanding the organization of the Mahindra Group, for example, a larger view, then about Tech Mahindra, then about the units that what kind of technologies we use, which customers, etc., to give a whole perspective of what place he's really getting into. And after that, the goal setting, and basically, I would say the first week when all the exposure to most of the stakeholders is done, then it's basically just making sure that along the journey there's a continuity, and especially in hybrid mode, the chances of disconnection and lack of
Yeah.
interaction is a risk. So basically, manager as well as BHR, business HR business partner, they just make sure that the touch points are there, and the dialogue is continuous. So in terms of the engagement, the holistic framework that we use, we call it MKS. Maybe M stands for Mahindra, CARES. The whole idea is that what an employee cares for, and if we are able to probably constantly keep that in mind and do something to address that aspect, we should have a good chances of really creating belongingness and engaged associate. So C stands for career, A stands for alignment, R stands for recognition, E stands for empowerment, and S stands for stride. So so that's basically a simple guiding framework that if we have a career proposition, if the person sees that I can build a career in this organization, that really creates some stickiness. Similarly, the goal alignment, personal goals, career goals, and the company goal, if the alignment is there, that probably can reinforce other engagement. Recognition, of course, all of us know, extremely important. Empowerment, so empowerment start playing even from the candidate stage. So if you empower the information, saying that this is how company is doing, etc., and understand what are the interesting points where the candidate is interested in, and share that information, and strive the work life balance. So I would say this is journey based experience. I would say delivery and tracking right from the candidate stage, and making sure that there's five things, whatever basically is relevant at that stage, we cater to that to the extent possible.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you for diving into the entire detailed framework and how Tech Mahindra is doing that for their hires. So Sandeep, I would now like to come to you. I mean, we spoke about the use of gamification in the pre-onboarding stage. Now, I want to learn from you more about the use of gamification in the onboarding stage and how that can unlock high performance in new hires.
Sure. I mean, that's an interesting question. The important aspect of unlocking, the potential of a new hire and bringing in, let's say, their skill sets, as early as possible, onto the forefront, I mean, typically what happens is in a gamified, learning environment, serious games are built around certain foundations of design, and one of the design methodologies that we typically follow is called as an evidence centered design philosophy. And today, if you look at assessments such as SATs and GREs, and more assessment frameworks are using the evidence centered approach. This approach is quite similar to the typical performance appraisal cycles that happens within an organization, which is nothing but the skills and proficiencies that you would like to measure are broken down into smaller tasks. So what we typically do is to do a domain analysis, understand the skills and proficiencies that are interested, which needs to be measured, which are broken down into tasks, and these tasks are embedded in the games. So when an employee who is joining the organization and is encountering a particular task, we would be in a position to measure their overall proficiency level to that particular skill, per se, right? So what happens is, if you're looking at critical skills or the 21st century skills that is there, a virtual environment like game provides a risk-free setup for employees to try out things even before they hit the floor. For example, if I'm joining a banking process, right, or an insurance process for that matter, so even before I am directly getting myself involved into actual production, what we would be in a position to do is to simulate a virtual setup where that entire process that is typically followed is enabled, so that the candidate will be able to try things out in a risk-free environment, try multiple options. It's a risk-free setup to fail, and more importantly, get an immediate feedback. So what this does is it helps new employees mirror the entire process that they would typically take a month or two when they would need to sit up with their colleagues to learn from. So game-based learning spaces are, obviously games are also assessment in nature, which allows you to capture and enable the learning process which mimics real world setups, and such setups will help organization get the employee productive as early as possible. So that's the philosophy that we typically follow, where we simulate virtual spaces, provide them ample opportunities for them to experiment with things, because adult learning also is a lot about experience and exploration, right? The element of discovery is a very critical aspect of adult learning, and that is what game environment does. So a new joining who's joining in discovers things in their own pace. It's not that he's being told what needs to be done, but he explores and discover things in their own pace, with an element of trial and error, failing, and at the same time trying to understand things from a immediate feedback perspective. So this feedback loop, I think it was Ashish, if I'm not wrong, was talking about a constant feedback loop in the onboarding process. Games do have that particular feedback loop where you provide them feedbacks, you give them the next level of tasks based on their own prior experiences, and give them an experience to exhibit their skills at any given point in time.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that, Sandeep, and introducing us to this new philosophy of evidence-centered design and the impact gamification can have on onboarding. So now, I would like to come to you, Abhishek, and since we've spoken about gamified onboarding, could you tell us a little bit more about how onboarding can accommodate the different learning styles and preferences of new hires?
I think there are multiple ways, and a lot of organizations, and even at UB, we try that, constantly experiment. So you have self-paced learning, you have workshops, you have mentoring, buddy programs, more buddy programs for the new hires, and like what Sandeep said, gamification solutions. There are also methods, kind of which you call feedback and reflective sessions, which some companies have experimented in a limited capacity, which is also a unique way of kind of for the new hire also to say, okay, where am I going? Am I on the right track? Um, I think all these are there, or you can have a blended module of all this, a combination of cells. So this is what we kind of piloted at UB, and we saw some success there because we are onboarding a lot of people, especially in the last year or so. We've onboarded almost 600 plus people. So required that kind of thing is. So what we did was is as soon as somebody accepts the job offer, and that period of 60 days, 90 days, whatever that is, we send them uh, some self-paced modules to know about the organization, and then know about your team. So if you're joining in sales versus if you're joining in engineering, and within that you're joining in some product, so we'll give you some what do you call online links, tutorials to know, because in our case, the domain is very complex. The people that we had don't come from the same domain. The entire debt ecosystem that we're doing. So it's not. It's a little complex domain. And so for people, so that when they come in, they go through those online video tutorials, our YouTube links. A lot of it is on our website. Some material we kind of push it to them, so that they can can go through it at their own pace. And see, one of the things in any kind of learning methodologies, everybody has its own pace of absorption of information. So one solution will not fit all. And I think one of the mistakes that a lot of us probably do that is we expect that okay, we're going to build a onboarding plan and everybody is going to be able to absorb every bit of it. I think let's understand we all have our own styles of learning and we have our own pace of learning. So I think the more amount of information that you can prep a person joining your organization, you can push and help the person learn it at their own pace really helps. Individualized experience matters more than the general carpet bombing, and I think that's where all of us as organizations have to really do a deep thinking and see what works for, say, Asmani will not work for Abhishek. Okay, so give them that own what you call bite-sized learning in whichever shape and form, small snippets, make them go through that, and this way you can also keep them engaged. So this entire process of engagement and onboarding also gets taken care of because you're constantly engaging and providing some information for people to learn. And once they onboard, I think then it is more about on the job. I think so. Like one of the things that we changed was day one when the person was joining, we are not doing any presentation. We don't have any onboarding presentation on day one. So it takes about half a day for the person to be up and running on IT systems, and that's the SLA we track. So the laptop, the email ID, everything set. The guy comes in, we do the basic checks. Uh, Half a day the person is onboarded, and actually post lunch the person actually goes and joins the team. And then we come back and we take them through self-learning, self-paced modules wherever needed. Some face-to-face workshop. We do business oriented, and we space it out over a period of couple of weeks. Why? Because everybody has this, because then it's going to be information overload. So we do that. And then what we do is we have kind of engagement survey, day 7, day 15, day 30, and we ask questions like, okay, like one of the things is, okay, is the role that you landed in after a month, is that same what you expected when we were doing the conversation during your hiring stage? We ask that question very, very candidly, and that tells us either we didn't explain the role correctly or did the person get all the information. We ask questions like, okay, when you join the team, were your tool systems everything up and running? Are you confident of going? So if it's a sales guy, we ask, are you confident of going out in the field and doing your first pitch? So we ask those questions because people also reflect back and tell, and that gives us a feedback. So it's a little long drawn process, but then it really helps because you can course correct during that journey. And I think one of the things that we do it largely at a from a leadership to a, say a mid management level is we try and have a 30-60 day plan for each of the person who's joining in on day one. So day one we sit down with the person and say, okay, this is how the next 30 days is going to look like for you. Okay, these are the people you have to meet, these are the introductions we're going to set up, this is the tutorials you're going to go through, and then we hand it over to that employee and we say, okay, now you can keep a track of are you on track. It's a very simple pager, one slider that we push, because the person knows where he is going to be, say in 30 days from now, and that gives the person the confidence that yes, I'm on the right track. And then those editings and keep on rest of the things keep on happening. And we follow that because eventually the goal is in 60 days the person should know what his KR is what he's supposed to deliver in the year. That's the culmination of that process. So a little long drawn, but then this has really helped us.
No, I think even if it's a long jump process, as long as it creates that impact and helps people perform in their roles, that's what matters. So thank you for sharing that. Ashish, the next question is for you. I would also like to combine it with an audience question that we have. So the first thing I wanted to understand is how can organizations measure the effectiveness of their onboarding programs and continuously improve them over time? And Abhishek spoke about engagement surveys, and one of our audience questions is like, besides employee surveys, what other ways can we take account of that employee feedback? So could you share like the measurement and how we can check tap into that employee feedback?
Sure, Asmani. I think very important question, and I agree. I think mostly we sort of rely very heavily only on that one specific employee feedback on onboarding and only stick with that and make changes accordingly. Uh, I think uh, for any organization to measure the effectiveness of how their onboarding strategies are working or improving them continuously, I think first and foremost they need to set very clear objectives, which is establish very specific measurable goals for the onboarding process. These goals could be around employee satisfaction, it could be about time to productivity, retention rates, performance indicators, all of these things. So first set the clear objectives. Clearly defined objectives help provide a very the basis for evaluation, and an improvement. So that's the first and foremost thing. Then of course comes in a variety of things. So it could be one, of course, collecting feedback from new hires. That's without so seeking feedback from them, not just on surveys, also one-on-one conversations, coffee connects, things like that. Also asking about what Abhishek just mentioned about their understanding of the job expectation, training expectation, clarity of role. I think very important. Of course the timeline has to be set rightly, but very very important, how much do they understand, and in terms of expectations, what's their clarity now. The other is also assess manager and team member feedback. So constantly check with managers and teams where large population is coming in or joining in, as to gathering their feedback from them as to what's their view on the onboarding process. This also makes sure that they're involved in the entire process, but also their insights sometimes are very very valuable in terms of giving information on what is the support provided, how could the communication be better, or if it's effectiveness is challenged and what could be done differently. Also making sure that the integration of the new hires in the team is taken much more accountable. They're much more accountable when they're involved in the entire process. That's one bit. Of course, a lot of key matrices around productivity, around employee retention rates, around engagement levels. I think very important is for comparing these matrices between different cohorts. So let's say a cohort of a new hire and cohort which is company benchmark, and then try and assess and see, if what is the impact of your onboarding program before launching and then after launching or changing the program. How have some of these things, which is retention rates, productivity, engagement levels, how have those changed? Making sure we do a lot of post onboarding evaluation. So assessing performance of new hires, again specifically against their KRAs, evaluating their progress against the goals and expectations set by the organization, making sure that there is ample checks post somebody comes in, not just the individual, the team, the managers, everybody. And I think lastly I would say sorry, my throat is slightly bad, but continuous improvement is basically using the entire insight that you've gained from this feedback, this data, this analysis. It's not very easy. Just it's easy to gather a lot of this data. It's difficult to put this into practice. So I think that's the important bit. If there requires a change, enhancement, refinement based on any of these identified areas for improvement, we need to regularly reassess the effectiveness, keep updating, and making sure there's ample focus put in on the action plan also, not just collating the data. I think that's where a lot of organizations sometimes I see make a mistake, where they do have a lot of data, they're sitting on a lot of details, but they're not really reading it right, analyzing it right, or doing something about it. So I think that's probably some of the things, Aswani, I would say would help.
Completely agree. I think translating data into some like actionable outcomes and actionable
Yeah.
strategies is the key, right? So Vinay, I would like to come to you. Would you like to add something more on how we can measure the effectiveness of our onboarding programs?
So I'll just take basically a step back in terms of what are the strategies during this period that we try to use. So basically for freshers it may be slightly different, but laterals they want to get into the work as soon as possible, right?
Yeah.
So that's of course the good thing for the company as well as the new joiners. However, I think one risk is that basically when somebody in a week or 2 week get into a project, start working on that, the risk of basically other connections that are to be established for person to be completely absorbed in the organizations is very important. and we need to track that. So for example, one thing I personally very insistent in the team is that there must be some meet and greet in person. So different leaders may take a, depending on nature of project that you are in. There are projects where the degree of autonomy of the work is very high. There are the transformation projects where the interdependence is very high. There are a lot of things to be invented and discovered, design decisions to be taken. So, so, be- so basis basically a type of work, they have their own strategies. But we say whether even if they're working from home largely, in-person connect is extremely important. So second thing is that the person who's really already absorbed in the project, make sure that the other stakeholder connect that is that are part of the onboarding process or assimilation process happens. In terms of feedback, so first day one, first week, first month, second, third month. So these feedbacks we take. Apart from that, we try to do a focus group discussion. So basically, get some 10, 12 new joiners after who have spent a month in the company, just basically generate a conversation, and in a group, if you moderate well, break the ice. After 10 minutes people start opening up, and
Yeah.
um, and if encourage that, so people will share their experience. They may also share some practices that they've seen in the past. So all those things. So first of all, basically in that conversation, the some belongingness really happens. People get more comfortable. They give feedback. They give ideas. So all of the you probably observe that, and that not necessarily probably we ask for the feedback once hitting that focus and skill, but very rich qualitative inputs we get, whether people are really enjoying or there's you can see some discomfort. So these are few things uh, that we just make sure that getting into a thick of things, we don't probably miss these aspects which are very important from a medium to long term engagement of the employee. So that's in addition to what I think Ashish and Abhishek said. I totally agree with that. These are few additional points here.
Yeah, no, thank you. Thank you for sharing that. And so, since we have just 10 minutes left, I would like to pick a couple of audience questions before we close. So, one of the first things that I wanted to ask is one of the questions that we have is for when it comes to candidate engagement during pre-boarding, when there are, information shared related to the products of the company, the services and culture. When the candidate doesn't join the organization, how can what should organizations do, when such a situation comes up? uh,
Um, so I think I can take a stab at that, and then others can pitch in. So I think one, of course, you don't share anything which is not a public information unless the person joins in. But I think this is always a great opportunity for you to showcase your culture, talk about your leadership, talk about the work that is being done. See, it's like a pitch. It's like what you're cascading to the outside world. So whether a person joins or doesn't join, you still have an opportunity to make an impression, uh, because we have a lot of rebound. We've seen so many times people have gone, not taken an offer, come back and said, okay, do you have an option, or that opportunity is still open? And we see that more often now, honestly,
Yeah.
as people start segregating between the kind of organizations I want to get into, stable organizations, organizations which are genuinely on the right path, and not getting into the frenzy. All this matters. So I think we should never lose out an opportunity not to kind of talk about your culture, about the kind of things you do. Of course, keep in mind that you're not sharing something which is not in the public domain, but always do that.
I
is
think
there any?
Abhishek,
Yeah. Okay, yes. Please.
yeah,
Yeah.
no, I think Abhishek made a very good point. I just want to probably say that the experience, when you talk about the employer branding, so the experience matters irrespective of whether the person joins us or not. Whatever good or bad experience he or she experiences, that is anyway the word of mouth is spread. So it is very
Yeah.
important to probably make sure that irrespective of the choice the person makes, we make sure good experience is delivered.
And in fact, one of the things is we just experimented that, I think somewhere about 6 8 months back, we used to send a questionnaire to candidates after their last round of interview. So whether we select or they reject us, irrespective of that, a survey goes to everyone. We were using that as an opportunity to see, okay, how are they experiencing the interview process, and we got some very good insights, which we actually actioned and we improved upon it. So as I said, whether somebody chooses you or not, it's an individual choice, but you always have a chance to make an impact.
Fair point. No, I think very good points, and I think I only wanted to add, Asmani, there are a lot of organizations which are also trying to now give. We spoke about online resources, providing candidates with access to online resources like company websites or intranet pages. But obviously, there's a lot of information which is very specific for the company and can't really be shared before somebody joins in. So many organizations are also putting in effort to create something which is in between. You have a internet page for everybody else, you have an intranet for the employees, but there's something in between which has more information than internet but less information than intranet, just for these people who are trying to onboard, who've been given the offers. So I think apart from these welcome packets, these virtual tools that a lot of people are doing, the providing the online resources and also some Q&A sessions, making sure. So we do some of these very regularly, with especially when we have a fair intake of, let's say, female employees who are joining us. Of course, everybody puts in equal effort on diversity and inclusiveness, but we try and make sure that we do a session, we call everybody, we have some of the senior leaders, female leaders from the organization just come in and have a chat. These are just people who've been given offers, and that's it. So that, I think, really makes a huge difference in terms of conversion rates, in terms of people backing out, and there they see the difference between what the organization is doing vis-a-vis others in terms of just the culture, the value set. So I think, yeah, they join, they don't join, I think providing them the experience which lasts a lifetime, that's our motto. That should be the case.
Great, great. Thank you for sharing that. So, one last question. Any final, quick takes from our panelists on how we can, some recommended strategies for onboarding in a fully remote setup? Anyone would like to take it?
I think most of us have gone back into a hybrid or fully office, but yeah, there are still
Yeah,
organized. But I think I would kind of pick up from what Vinay said. Um, Nothing can beat an in-person collaboration. Nothing can beat an in-person experience, even if you are fully remote. I think, and this goes back to all the conversation we had around culture and how you bring in people. I think one, if you are remote, you need to over-index on communication.
Yeah.
You need to
correct,
have lot more effort on communication than what you do in person. To, even if you're remote, find an opportunity to get people to meet in person. See, a human connect can never be replaced, cannot be replicated probably virtually. It can go to some extent. So find that. So there are organizations which are fully remote, but they make it a point that like once in a quarter or once in a month or once in 2 months, at least the local team comes, and even if they pick up a space in a WeWork or a shared space, they come in and they collaborate.
correct,
So always do that. But yeah, if you're remote, you have to over index on communication. Second, I think, and we learned this during COVID time, I think we need to ease out the ways of connecting with people. So things like Slack or Teams, Google Chats, those are the ways where instant communication, information transfer, getting into a quick huddle room. So if there's a five engineers who are sitting in different location, if they have to quickly collaborate and brainstorm and ideate a problem, can they? So build that culture of instant communication and somebody kind of overseeing it. I think that those are the only ways. But yes, nothing can replace in-person connect. So find out those ways. I think I would always strongly recommend that.
So basically, sometimes I say that for this initial period, my single focus HR guys, are we socializing enough? If you
hmm,
have not to do in person, please do that. So the work will be taken care by all the team managers. There's so many people, but my single question is: are we socializing enough in person? If not possible, virtually, as Abhishek said, make sure that they forcibly create some touch points where
correct.
you socialize. Yeah.
Ashwani, I think just to add, I think we've got actually top two pillars. We've got clear communication, collaboration, that's been spoken about. What Vinay was mentioning was remote team building, engagement, making sure there's enough socializing. And I think just one more point I wanted to add was making sure the approach that the organization follows is very result oriented. In a remote setup, it's very crucial that the outcomes, to focus more on the outcomes rather than just the amount of time or the hours that somebody's worked. And I think emphasizing very clearly on goals, objectives for each team member, the performance criteria. Managers should set very realistic expectations and provide clarity. I think that goes missing, and we've all seen that happening. And I would say, if you have to pick up top three pillars, I would say clear communication, uh, making sure we are remotely team building, engaging, and making sure it's a very result oriented approach that we follow.
Great. Thank you for sharing that. Sandeep, any last words from you?
Yeah, I think it's been beautifully summarized by everybody in the panel in terms of how do you manage things remotely. Like I've been a great proponent of digital learning experiences. I completely agree with Abhishek and the rest of the panelists where the live connect cannot definitely be replaced by virtual, but you could definitely supplement, have a supplementary thing where that reinforces, because you might not be in a position to be there all the time, and that is one of the reasons where you would need reinforcers and areas to supplement and strengthen the existing connects that organizations have. So some of the virtual tools and gamification tools would help us build that kind of reinforcers. That's extremely important.
Okay, great. So with that, we come to the end of our session. Thank you, Ashish, Abhishek, Vinay, and Sandeep, for sharing your precious time with us and for sharing those wonderful takeaways and for answering all of our audience questions. It's been wonderful hearing from you and learning from you today. And I would also like to say a big thank you to Imarticus Learning for helping us curate this session. And finally, a big thank you to our audience who were with us on a Friday evening. And it was wonderful hosting you all and hope you had a great time. And once again, a big thank you to our speakers. Have a great day and stay safe, everyone. Thank you once again.
Thank you.
Thank
Thanks,
Thank you,
you.
everyone.
everyone. Have a good evening.